Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is now in cinemas. It's opening here in Malaysia almost a week before the United States. It is being billed as the 8th and final installment of the Tom Cruise Mission Impossible franchise. We don't know if that'll be the case, but as it goes, this is going to be the last movie. And you know what? It begins in a way that kind of cements that notion. The first opening, when Ethan Hunt gets his Mission Impossible mission task / message that will self-destruct in 5 seconds, it is a recap of all of the Mission Impossible movies that have come before. And so right from the get-go, it feels like you're being set up for this epic finale. And in many ways, The Final Reckoning at 2 hours and 50 minutes is an epic finale. I will say this, the first 15 to 20 minutes of the movie are pretty slow. They're slow because it's exposition heavy. It's almost as if Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise felt like they need to catch people up who may not have seen the previous 7 movies. So there is a lot of repetition. There is a lot of filling you in on everything that has come before, on who Ethan Hunt is and why he is important to not just the Mission Impossible universe, but the world. And all of that is very weighty. And so the first 15 to 20 minutes can be a little draggy, but then everything kicks off and then it's just go, 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 and it's non-stop. Which isn't to say that the first 15 to 20 minutes doesn't have any action. There's plenty of freaking action, even among all of that exposition. But it's the recap portion. It's the, hey, don't worry if you haven't seen the previous 7 movies. We got you. We're going to re-explain what this AI shit is and where it came from and why it's dangerous for the world and why Ethan Hunt is the only person that can save us.
Yeah, I don't like that.
I didn't like that either, but then as soon as the movie started going,
It got going.
it's like I forgot those first 15 minutes. It's like I was all in. And
Yeah.
good God, the kind of stuff they do in this film is impressive. Like, I went back and I started skimming through some of the previous Mission Impossible movies, and yes, the stunts are impressive, but there are 2 set pieces in this movie that will literally take your breath away. Like, that last movie had the jump with the motorcycle, and sure, that was great, and the train fight was pretty cool, but there are 2 set pieces here involving Ethan Hunt that will take your breath away.
You've mentioned the heavy exposition at the beginning, which I am really annoyed with. Yes, I understand there are people in the world who are younger than 40. I don't generally want to know many of them, but it's like your movie cannot include the homework. I don't like homework in movies, but you cannot spend your 2 hour, 50-minute runtime on catching up people who have not seen 7 movies. They've had years to do that. It is not my fault that they haven't done it. Okay, so I felt like that really ruined the experience for me, because I'm rewatching these bits that are, yeah, some of it's kind of nice because it's almost like in memoriam of the 7 movies we've seen before. And that's cool. That's kind of nice. However, to do it in exposition, to do it in voiceover, really feels tacky. The second thing I didn't like was that, and I guess this is a Mission Impossible problem that's come up in the last maybe 4 or 5 films, in that actually the story is very light. There's very little dialogue. There are all these, I call them cameo appearances, because there are these famous people, other famous actors, who show up and do 1 or 2 scenes. They're literally to get Ethan from point A to point B, or rather point D to E, where he will do something between F and G, and then H and I, somebody else comes in and just moves him along. I find that really annoying. I don't know why I found that particularly annoying in this one. I think because of the weight of it potentially being the final film. I think the baggage from film 7, which was mostly just set up for film 8, I found that really annoying.
I didn't mind that so much. Because I felt like this franchise has earned it. And that's why I didn't mind it so much. I think if you are a fan of the Mission Impossible franchise and you've seen how the movies have kind of evolved over the last 3 decades, I think, if anything, it's earned the right to do that. And what I enjoyed about that and why I didn't find it annoying was because I thought that the action and all of those set pieces involving those actors were executed really well.
Yeah,
I thought there were still surprises there.
I just felt like it would have been nice if there was some real sort of emotional story here, as opposed to just let's watch Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt do crazy and crazy and crazy and crazier stunts. Because it's the eighth and potentially final film, I'm going back thinking about the earlier films and how they had a really tight story, character stories, right? Here, it just really feels like set piece to set piece to set piece to set piece. And
I feel like that's what happened from Mission Impossible 3 onwards. From the J.J. Abrams one, from the Rabbit Foot movie, it was really set piece after set piece after set piece. Sure, Philip Seymour Hoffman was a really interesting villain, but it was really jumping from action sequence to action sequence. Mission Impossible 3 was the Fast Five, right? That's when they really found their footing on what they wanted the franchise to be. Mission Impossible 1 was a throwback to a spy thriller. It was a Brian De Palma film. It was what the TV series was. It didn't make as much money. It wasn't as well received when it came out. I think it's received better now, but it wasn't as well received when it came out, which is why they jumped to Mission Impossible 2 and completely went in the opposite direction by getting John Woo to do it. And so it became this highly wild, artistic, weird, stylized action movie in a very John Woo style, which didn't really work for the Mission Impossible brand.
yeah,
And then they kind of found a middle ground in 3, or at least knew what they wanted to do. It was kind of Fast and the Furious making its way slowly to Fast 5, dragging that vault through the streets of Brazil and going, wait, this is what people want. And then it's just been escalation from that point on. For me, I found this surprisingly emotional because I thought the emotional beats were quite powerful. And I think a lot of it had to do with nostalgia, which they cashed in on. Because especially if you've been following the franchise, even the bad Mission Impossible movies aren't bad. Like when you watch it now, you're like, oh, I see what it is. And I see how it's built this character up over the last 3 decades. And so for me, that kind of worked. I was surprisingly emotional during the big beats of this movie. And so for me, that wasn't too much of a problem. I felt like they needed to do a greatest hits tour if this is truly going to be the final one. I kind of believe that it will be the final one because I think in my head, Tom Cruise wants to move on to do other things because every time he's making one of these movies, it's not like he releases anything in between. It feels like the Mission Impossible movies are all consuming.
Yeah, it just really takes up all his time and all his preparation, right? He has to become a several times over PADI certified diver. He has to be able to fly these planes because obviously he's going to fly these planes. He has to get his parachuting thing. So it just becomes this whole thing that he focuses in on.
I think with a final movie in a franchise this epic, you need to do that farewell tour. And I have to say, a lot of the moments, which we won't spoil for you, really kind of pay off, especially when it calls back to like all of the movies that have come before. I didn't feel it was cheap.
On some level, all my complaints have not diminished my experience of the film. I think when we left, I was pretty much riding the high of the movie, and I think I gave it an 8 out of 10. But I think now sitting down almost 24 hours later, I'm kind of dropping it down to like a 7. I can see how all those middling average reviews that have come out of the US have come about. I don't think it's as harsh as a lot of those guys have said it. I think I've seen a couple of 6s and maybe even a 5, but it's nowhere near that. But it is not up there in terms of Mission Impossible films. I think this for me is a safe 7. A lot of the beats were nicely done. I completely agree with you. I think the action sequences were jaw-dropping and just take your breath away, especially because Tom Cruise is probably the last true action star who will do everything himself. And that comes out in the film. I just feel like I wish there was a little bit more story to it.
I disagree. I'm still at an 8. For me, it's because I honestly think this is the last of this kind of movie we'll ever see. Like, I don't think anyone else is going to spend between 300 and 400 million. I don't think they're going to take the actors to every actual location. I think they're going to end up shooting all of this stuff on the volume. I don't think you're going to get an aerial dogfight the way this movie does it with Tom Cruise hanging off multiple planes. I don't think you'll get an underwater sequence like this, which looks as real because, well, it was real for the most part. I mean, he wasn't in the Bering Sea, but he was probably in a giant pool. But at the same time, it looked pretty fucking impressive. And that's why I think it's an 8 for me. I think anybody, and it's proof that anybody can be James Bond. You just need to find a good-looking, suave actor to be James Bond. But I think Tom Cruise is Ethan Hunt. I think it's going to be very hard to find a replacement for someone who can actually pull this character off, but also pull this kind of movie off. And so for that reason alone, it's still an 8 for me, just because as a cinematic experience, we're not going to see something like this. Not for a long time.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I agree.
And I don't know if studios will even take the risk if it wasn't someone like Tom Cruise behind this, making all the decisions and pushing this forward. And so for me, in that sense, Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning is a very unique product in cinema, as was Top Gun. And I think F1 as well, to a certain extent, to a smaller extent. And what Joseph Kosinski has done with getting people like Brad Pitt and Damson Idris actually behind the wheel of an F1 car and have them really driving it. You know, there are a few directors and a few actors left in the world who strive for that level of realism. And you know what? As the audience, we can actually tell.
Yeah.
Like, we can tell when it's a stuntman who is doing the fight sequences and the camera has to pan away a little too quickly. And we can tell when it's a stuntman underwater. And we can tell when it's a CGI underwater sequence as opposed to an actual actor navigating a submarine or the set of a submarine. I think that's pretty impressive. So,
yeah,
for me, all of that kind of added to the weight of what this movie is because, yeah, it felt weighty. It didn't feel like CGI threats.
Yeah.
There were real stakes here, and I think that was interesting. And also, I have to say, right up until the end of the movie, I wasn't sure who was going to live and who was going to die. I think McQuarrie and Cruise made some very interesting decisions early in the film to kill off certain characters, and that left you going, oh wait, no one is safe.
Yeah.
If this is the final movie, no one is safe. And so therefore, it felt like there were real stakes. I mean, I didn't believe for a second that the entity was going to blow up the world as we know it. I knew that Ethan Hunt would win at the end of the day because he is the hero. But at the same time, I wasn't sure if the whole team was going to survive. And I thought that added a level of weight to the show as well. So for those reasons, I really enjoyed this movie. I'm with you when you say it isn't the best Mission Impossible. And it isn't by far, right? Because it has that weight of exposition and all of that stuff with it. And for me, the best ends up being either, is it Ghost Protocol where he's hanging off a plane? That was pretty good. And Mission Impossible 3, I think the J.J. Abrams one probably had the most character and story.
Yes.
And that was probably the most well-written Mission Impossible movie. Because you're right, when you think about it, in these 2 hours and 50 minutes, what? Tom Cruise has maybe 3 pages of dialogue? Like, it's very little dialogue. He barely says anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even if he says stuff, it is monologues. It is speeches on how he needs to save the world or how people need to be saved, right? And so all of those nitpicks aside, as a cinematic experience, as a whole, I left the cinema feeling great.
I mean, I left the cinema feeling excited. I left the cinema feeling like it was time well spent with Ethan Hunt. And not just with this film, but just in the idea of the last 8 films have been time well spent with Ethan Hunt. And I think if this is the final one, I think that is something you really want, right? It's the opposite of what happens at the end of Game of Thrones. Because at the end of Game of Thrones, you felt like you've just wasted all that time for a really shitty fucking ending that betrays all the characters. Whereas here, you're like, yeah, That was time well spent. Thank you so much, Ethan Hunt and Mission Impossible movie series. I think that's key.
My nitpicks are different from yours, but I have made my peace with my nitpicks in that my nitpicks are still rooted in the fact that I'm a huge fan of the original TV series. And I always loved when the Mission Impossible movies leaned into the masks and the voice changing and the setting up of the fake sets to dupe someone to believing they're dying, but actually they're not. And it's all Ethan Hunt and his team, or Jim Phelps and his team, and all that stuff, which they did in the last movie. But in this one, it really was back to action man Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
And so I've made my peace with that because I realize that from Mission Impossible 3, this franchise has become something different and something else.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't be angry at what the Fast and the Furious franchise has become because I loved the first Fast and the Furious for the fact that it was a street racing movie. It's gone so far past that even though Vin Diesel included one 5-minute street racing scene in Fast X, doesn't make up for it.
In some ways, maybe that sort of plays into my comment regarding this not having a strong enough story, right? Because they don't do any of that stuff anymore. It really is just set piece to set piece. And I know you've said you've come to terms with it and I've accepted it, but it isn't going to make me feel any less wishful that I had those sequences and those moments and those story beats. They do one here where there's a face pull, and that just feels almost like a requirement for a Mission Impossible movie. It doesn't even really have to do anything. It's just a face pull. And it's just like, it feels like ticking a box. In this one, it really feels like ticking a box. They don't even bother to work up to it. They don't even bother to try and make it mission critical. It's just a thing that they did. Remember when Tom Cruise had to put on Philip Seymour Hoffman's face and the way they had to shoot that, the way they figured out how to shoot that physically in camera, and how that became such a point in the movie about how, oh no, what if he doesn't do it right? What if his voice is off? What if his walk is off? And even in the last one, when Tom Cruise sort of infiltrates a security meeting and just go like, that was cool, I guess. I wish they hadn't dropped the Mission Impossible elements, the TV show Mission Impossible elements, and stopped making it just an impossible mission that Tom Cruise and Ethan Hunt need to sort out.
Not a difficult mission, mind you, because difficult should be a walk in the park.
Yeah. This is an impossible mission. Yeah.
There were a couple of other things which I liked. I thought the last movie, as in Dead Reckoning, I thought Dead Reckoning did away with a lot of the humor of the series. And I think this movie brought it back. And you saw Ethan Hunt have certain lighter moments with his team and the cast, and I thought that works. Dead Reckoning was so heavy. I mean, this is still heavy because everyone acts as if it is the end of the world, and they only talk like this because, oh my God, it's the end of the world. And sure, that's throughout the movie, but there were lighter moments, there were certain comedic elements, which was a signature throughout all of the Mission Impossible movies. And I'm glad that they had a little bit of that in this film. I think I really appreciated that. And I thought there was one big, let's not call it a cameo, there was one big return, which I thought was really a valuable payoff. And I'm so glad they did that. And for me, those are the kind of homages and callbacks that show how much Tom Cruise kind of appreciates the franchise and every element of the franchise and all the work that has gone into it. So all of that stuff I kind of really enjoyed about the film, despite them moving away from the Mission Impossible thematic elements from the original series. I will say, though, I still think they are missing a beat by not having a new IMF series. Don't call it Mission Impossible if you want that just to be the giant epic movies. Just call it IMF the series or something. And redo the TV series. It doesn't have to have Tom Cruise, he can just be a producer, but there are so many IMF teams. And I think you could focus on any one of them, because those are the kind of week-to-week stories that I would love to see. And that's when you can lean into all of those cool spycraft elements while keeping the movie as this big, epic, cinematic experience. With or without Tom Cruise, right? Who knows? Maybe Glenn Powell is going to take over the franchise or whatever. I don't know. Even if Tom Cruise wants to move on to other things, I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, no studio in their right mind would drop this IP. It is worth too much money.
The studio is just sort of waiting to hear from Tom Cruise about what he wants to do. I think he's got such a hold on the brand, whether officially or not, I don't know, I'm not sure. But he's got such a hold on the brand that it really depends on what he wants to do, lor. It really is a waiting for Tom Cruise to call you back kind of situation, right? Is there a ninth movie? Is there a TV show? Do you want to make a movie where you hand over the mantle and not be Ethan Hunt? It's just something, right? Like, what does Ethan Hunt want to do? What does Tom Cruise want to do? Does he want to reboot the entire thing and exec produce it for someone else? I think that is the problem right now with regards to the Mission Impossible series. I think, if anything, I'm more curious about the Mission Impossible series moving forward than I am about James Bond, because they've messed that up so badly with the killing of Daniel Craig in the last one that they're just going to stumble their way to the next film.
I don't want to talk any more about the movie because I'm scared of spoiling it, because there are certain spoilers that could give too much away in this film. But let me just say this. The thing I love most about the Mission Impossible movie is, and I think the thing Tom Cruise understands, is that we require escapist heroes like this. He is the very definition of a good guy, of a patriot, of a hero. He will do whatever it takes to save the world and do the right thing. And that hasn't changed throughout the series, irrespective of how big or small the stakes are. Is it an AI entity that is going to wipe out humanity as we know it? Or is he just trying to save his wife from a crazed terrorist? Irrespective of that, he is always doing the right thing. I mean, even if you look at Mission Impossible 3, when Owen Davian has his wife at gunpoint, he's still trying to lie to him so he doesn't get the rabbit's foot. He's still playing that game. He's still like, okay, it's in Paris. It's here, it's there, right? And he's counting up to 10 before he shoots his wife in the head. So Ethan Hunt is always conflicted with doing the right thing, being the hero, saving his loved ones, all of that stuff. And I think that is the kind of hero that cinema needs, because so often we are left with even our superheroes being too complex and too complicated. Thunderbolts being the great example of bad guys being good, right? And I think there are very few shows left where we have real heroes and real villains. Like, we've spoken about this before, Bahir, where I can't remember the last time I've seen a villainous villain in a Disney cartoon. And I think that's a problem. I think our children need to watch shows where they see heroes being super and heroic and villains being bad and evil. That's how you draw that stark line when you are a child and you understand what is good and bad. And sure, the world is grey, but that doesn't matter. That's why we have cinema. That's why we have escapist fantasies. And I think Tom Cruise understands that. That's why these movies do so well.
Yeah. I will miss this franchise.
If it is truly the end.
To be fair, even if it isn't, even if there's a ninth film, I agree with you in that I don't think we'll ever get a Mission Impossible the way 7 and 8 or 6 were.
No, but actually, even realistically, you have to do something different so people don't compare it to what has come before. Because then you're setting yourself up to fail.
Quick question. Ethan Hunt was not a character in the Mission Impossible TV shows, was he?
No, he was specifically created for the films.
So technically, that isn't wrong either. I mean, in the sense that there could be a ninth movie with Glenn Powell and Ethan Hunt is a retired agent that's on the phone just helping him along, right? Like, so they can do it. It's not a James Bond situation. It's a lot easier in that sense, right?
I mean, that's the reason why people were so pissed off with the first movie, right? Because they made Jim Phelps a traitor. And Jim Phelps is the main guy in the series. He is the goodest of the good guys. Yes. And they made him a bad guy, which I think was a really cunning move on the part of De Palma, because it really fucking pulled the rug from out under you, right?
But even then, right? Like, I think just that first one, you're right. Making Jim Phelps the villain was a fucking bold move. But at the same time, he wasn't a villain because he was turned by money. He wasn't a villain because he's doing it for selfish reasons. And I think that was important. That Brian De Palma is saying that even in a world where good guys are good and bad guys are bad, a good guy can still be turned by the right reasons. And that was important.
Go check out Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. It's now showing in Malaysian cinemas. There are some amazing IMAX sequences in it, so it's definitely worth watching on the biggest screen you can find. Let us know what you think once you've seen it. You know how to reach out. Goggler MY is our Instagram account. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline, 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.